Medieval executioners, the most feared job in history. Imagine a man so feared that no one will sit beside him in the tavern. No one will shake his hand. The baker won't take coins directly from his fingers. He must drop them into a bowl of vinegar first. He lives at the edge of town, away from everyone. His children can only marry the children of others like him. And when he walks through the market, the crowd parts around him in silence. Yet this same man is paid well. He holds an official position. The law itself depends on him. Because his job is to kill legally, publicly, in front of cheering crowds. This was the medieval executioner. A man trapped in an impossible paradox, essential to society, yet cast out of it entirely. Feared, despised, and untouchable, while also performing one of the most important public functions of the age. His life was stranger and darker than almost any job in human history. Let's uncover the dark truth. The man everyone needed and nobody wanted. Let's start with the central contradiction that defined an executioner's entire existence. Medieval society demanded justice, and that justice was brutal and public. Executions, floggings, brandings, and mutilations all required someone to actually carry them out. The state couldn't function without this person. He was, in a very real sense, the hand of the law made flesh, the final instrument of the king's or the town's authority. And yet that very same society regarded him as deeply unclean. Across much of medieval Europe, especially in the German-speaking lands, the executioner was considered dishonorable. This wasn't just an insult. It was a formal social status that contaminated everything he touched. Because he dealt in death and shed human blood for a living, he was seen as spiritually and socially polluted. The result was a brutal paradox. He was indispensable and untouchable at the same time. He held an official, salaried post, but he couldn't enter many guilds, couldn't hold honorable office, and often couldn't even be buried in the same ground as ordinary citizens. He killed so that others wouldn't have to, and they despised him for it. Picture the loneliness of that life. You do a job the entire community relies upon, and your reward is to be shunned by every one of them. You enforce the rules, yet you live outside the very society you protect. This single contradiction shaped everything else about the executioner's world, including where he was allowed to live and whom he was allowed to love. Living on the edge of the world, now let's look at how that dishonorable status played out in the physical reality of daily life. Because it was crueler than you might expect, the executioner was frequently forced to live apart from everyone else. Often in a house at the edge of town, near the city walls, the gallows, or other unclean places like the leper house or the knacker's yard where dead animals were processed. His home itself was marked, a place ordinary people avoided. The avoidance reached into the smallest details of life. In many towns, an executioner was expected to identify himself in public, sometimes by his clothing or by standing apart. He often couldn't touch goods at the market freely in some places. He had to point at what he wanted with a stick rather than handle it, and merchants would take his payment indirectly to avoid touching his tainted hands. He was frequently served last, drank from his own separate cup at the tavern, and sat alone. Imagine the daily humiliation. You go to buy bread and the baker recoils. You enter the tavern and the bench around you empties. Children are pulled away from you in the street. Every ordinary human interaction that the rest of us take for granted, a handshake, sharing a meal, a friendly word, is denied to you not because of anything you've done wrong, but simply because of the work the law itself ordered you to perform. This isolation was so total that it forced executioners into a world almost entirely of their own. And nowhere is that clearer than in who they were permitted to marry and what happened to their children. A trade sealed by blood and marriage. Here's where the executioner's isolation becomes something genuinely haunting. It didn't end with one man. It was inherited. Because executioners were treated as outcasts, honorable families refused to marry into them. No respectable craftsman wanted his daughter wed to a hangman, and no honorable family wanted an executioner's son. So executioners were left with only one option: to marry within their own kind. The daughters of executioners married the sons of other executioners. Families of knackers, gravediggers, and other dishonorable trades intermarried with them. Over generations, this created sprawling dynasties of executioners bound together by blood and trade across entire regions. The profession became, in practice, a family business passed from father to son. A boy born into such a family often had his future sealed at birth. You would learn the trade from his father, inherit the post, and one day pass it to his own son. There was frequently no escape because no other respectable path was open to him. The most famous example is the Sanson family of Paris. For roughly 6 generations, from the late 17th century into the 19th, members of the Sanson family served as the official executioners of Paris. The most famous of them, Charles-Henri Sanson, carried out executions during the French Revolution and is recorded as having put to death nearly 3,000 people, including, by the order of the new republic, King Louis X himself. Remarkably, Charles-Henri reportedly loathed the trade he'd been born into, viewing it as a terrible inheritance rather than a calling. Think about that. An entire bloodline locked into the business of death, generation after generation, unable to marry out, unable to walk away. And yet, despite all this stigma, the job demanded real and serious skill, which brings us to the work itself. The terrible skill of a clean death. Let's step up to the scaffold now, because there's a brutal irony at the heart of the executioner's craft. A merciful death required tremendous skill. Take beheading, considered a more honorable death, often reserved for nobility. A skilled executioner using a heavy sword or axe aimed to sever the head with a single, clean stroke. But this was far harder than it sounds. The human neck is tough. The target is moving, the victim may be trembling or struggling, and the executioner has one chance to get it right in front of a watching crowd. A botched execution was a horror for everyone. There are grim historical accounts of executioners who needed multiple blows to finish the job, hacking away while the victim suffered and the crowd recoiled or turned on the executioner himself. A good headsman, by contrast, took pride in a swift, clean kill. Some used a special executioner's sword, made purely for this purpose, often with a blunt or squared-off tip, because it was never meant to stab in combat, only to swing through a neck. This is why the condemned sometimes paid or tipped their own executioner. By offering money and forgiveness, a prisoner hoped to ensure the executioner would do his work quickly and cleanly, rather than clumsily prolonging the agony. Your killer's competence could mean the difference between an instant death and a drawn-out nightmare. Hanging, breaking on the wheel, burning, each method demanded its own grim expertise. The executioner had to know exactly how to carry out each sentence the court handed down. He was, in a dark way, a craftsman. And astonishingly, some of these men left records of their work, including one whose diary survives to this day. The hangman who kept a diary. Here's a detail that transforms the executioner from a faceless figure into a real, thinking human being. One of them wrote it all down. His name was Franz Schmidt, the public executioner of the German city of Nuremberg. He held the post for an extraordinary 45 years, from 1573 to 1617. And throughout his long career, he kept a journal, a meticulous, year-by-year record of his work. In it, he documented the 361 executions he personally carried out, along with countless floggings and lesser punishments. What makes the diary so chilling and so fascinating is its matter-of-fact tone. Schmidt recorded the names of those he executed, the crimes they committed, and the methods he used: beheadings, hangings, breaking on the wheel, drownings. He noted whether a death was clean or troublesome. It reads like a professional logbook, the careful records of a tradesman documenting his output. But the diary also reveals a complicated man. Schmidt appears to have seen himself as a servant of justice, not a monster. He was deeply religious. He didn't drink. And he spent much of his life trying to do something remarkable, to restore his family's honor and lift the stain of the dishonorable trade. Late in his life, after his long service, he reportedly succeeded in having his honorable status formally restored, a rare escape from the executioner's curse. Through Franz Schmidt, we get an almost unique window into the mind of a man who killed for a living and yet thought of himself as upright and dutiful. And his story hints at the strangest twist of all. Because the executioner wasn't only a dealer in death, sometimes people came to him to be healed. The executioner, as a secret healer, brace yourself, because this is one of the most surprising truths of the entire profession. The man who killed people was often also sought out to cure them. It sounds impossible, but it makes a dark kind of sense. Through his work breaking, cutting, and dismembering bodies, the executioner developed an intimate, hands-on knowledge of human anatomy that rivaled or exceeded that of trained physicians. He knew how bones connected, how joints worked, how to set a fracture or treat a wound. So quietly and often illegally, many executioners ran a thriving sideline as healers, setting broken limbs and treating injuries for paying customers who came to him in secret. But it gets stranger and darker still. Medieval and early modern Europe was gripped by a widespread belief in the healing power of the human body itself, especially the bodies of the executed. People believed that parts and substances taken from a fresh corpse, particularly that of an executed criminal, held potent magical and medicinal properties. The executioner controlled the supply. He had access to the very bodies people craved. So he sold human fat, believed to ease aches and pains. He sold blood, which some drank in the belief it cured epilepsy. He sold pieces of skin, bone, and the rope or other items from the execution itself, all thought to carry healing or protective power. The hand of glory, the preserved hand of a hanged man, was believed to hold magical properties. Imagine the surreal reality of it. The most shunned man in town, untouchable in the market, was secretly visited under cover of darkness by desperate people seeking the body parts and grim remedies only he could provide. He profited from death twice over, once for ending the life, and again for selling the corpse. And this captures the final, defining truth of his existence. The loneliest power in the world. Let's step back and take in the full, strange shape of this life, because it was a study in contradictions found in almost no other profession. The executioner held genuine power. He was the literal embodiment of the state's ultimate authority, the power over life and death. When he raised his sword, he acted in the name of the king, the court, and the law. In that moment, he was the most powerful man on the scaffold. He was also, usually, well paid. Executioners often earned a steady salary, plus fees, for each execution, sometimes housing, and the extra income from healing and selling remedies. By the standards of the common people, many lived comfortably. And yet all that power and money bought him no acceptance whatsoever. He could not buy his way out of the stigma. He had wealth but no honor, authority but no friends, an essential public role but no place at the public table. He was simultaneously at the center of society's most important rituals and completely exiled from its everyday warmth. That is what makes the executioner perhaps the most psychologically fascinating job in all of history. Most feared occupations are feared because they're dangerous to the worker. The executioner's job was feared for the opposite reason, not because it might kill him, but because of what it did to his standing as a human being. He paid for his bread not with risk to his life, but with his entire social existence. So when you weigh it all together, the picture that emerges is genuinely haunting. The final truth. So let's gather everything we've uncovered about the most feared job in history. A man essential to the law, yet cast out of society. Forced to live at the edge of town, served last, touched by no one, his coins dropped into vinegar. Locked into a bloodline of fellow outcasts, unable to marry out, passing the grim trade from father to son for generations as the Sanson dynasty of Paris did for over a century. A craftsman of death whose skill meant the difference between a clean end and a butchered one. A man like Franz Schmidt, who killed 361 people and still saw himself as a servant of justice fighting to reclaim his honor. And, astonishingly, a secret healer who sold the very flesh of the dead to the desperate. The deepest truth here is that the executioner was a kind of human sacrifice himself. Society needed someone to do its bloodiest work, and that it needed someone to blame and shun for that very blood. He absorbed the guilt of the entire community, allowing everyone else to feel clean. He was, in the end, a man punished endlessly for doing exactly what the law commanded. It's a powerful reminder of how societies create outcasts to carry burdens no one else will touch. If this descent into the executioner's world gripped you, hit subscribe and ring the bell. More buried secrets are waiting to be unlocked. Tell us in the comments, could you have lived a life like this? And until next time, never forget, the past was far stranger and far lonelier than they ever taught you in school.